Yeah, hello. My name is Mark Peterson. I have been working with Wallbridge for 2 years in a role senior exploration consultant, effectively working at the level of a VP of exploration with Wallbridge. I joined following the exit of Wallbridge's former VP exploration, who went on to a new role with Rio Tinto. I've been in the exploration and development and in mining operations business for more than 40 years. I started out working as a field geo and gradually worked my way up the ladder to where I am today. My background, frankly, spans the full spectrum of exploration, discovery, and development from pre-discovery projects, having contributed to a few successful discoveries that actually went all the way through into commercial production. And that includes feasibility studies, and then also working as a VP exploration for an operating company, New Gold, where I met Brian, where we worked for 10 years. And my role there was a combination of replacing reserves from production, identifying new opportunities for acquisition, and then pursuing earlier stage projects toward discovery. And included in that resume would include the acquisition of the Blackwater project, which Artemis Gold has very successfully developed and is operating today, and the New Afton copper gold porphyry in Kamloops, among those things. So anyway, I'm glad to be here.
Mark, good to have you on board. We've just spoken with Brian. Give us an update, corporately how things are advancing. I was interested in your backgrounds there, but in a sense, I'm trying to work out, what's your brief here at Wallbridge Mining, and maybe start with describing, from a helicopter point of view, what do you think the challenges are at Fenelon and Martiniere?
My brief is effectively to help advance both the Fenelon project, move that along down the development path alongside technical studies teams. And then we have our earlier stage opportunity with the Martiniere project, which is kind of in the space of resource delineation, but we're still there's a lot more to explore in that gold system. So it's a bit of a twofold brief, but also, of course, we have a 600 square kilometer land package right directly along strike of the Detour Lake gold mine over in Ontario. So it's very fertile ground for new discoveries as well.
Okay, well, why don't we start with Martiniere, and then we'll get into the weeds proper with Fenelon. So with that kind of, I'm sort of quite interested in that dragonfly shear corridor geometry. So how is the team refining the kind of 3D structural model to, help you distinguish a kind of discrete mineralized lens versus stacked parallel shears? I mean, what are you seeing down there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've made, apart from the drilling that we've been reporting on through the course of the year with 4 news releases, and all of our results for this year from the drilling program are now out in the public domain. In parallel with that, we brought in a new senior geologist about this time a year ago, and she has quite a bit of experience with projects at this stage, Cote Lake being probably the one she's worked on the most. So in terms of our approach in understanding Martiniere better than we did a year ago, frankly, we went back to first principles and really focused on, as we drill more, we're also transitioning away from more of a conceptual based interpretive approach to more, just fundamentally empirical approach. And so what that looks like is we went back and just went piece by piece, beginning with developing a proper structural model that tracks all of the faults in 3D, and that was very meticulous exercise going back through historic core photos, as well as in the core shack, looking at the core of the new holes coming out of the ground, and in a few cases, I believe pulling some core out of the racks. So really mapping the structural fault zones and linking them up from section to section in 3D, and confirming that what we're correlating makes sense. So at the end of the day, on just the fault model component, we ended up, I think, with 14 different recognized fault structures along the 2-kilometer long Bug Lake deformation corridor. So that was step one. Step two was then essentially the same exercise, but mapping out in 3D the intrusive units, which are integral to the whole Bug Lake gold system and the story. And then finally, and this is the step we're in currently at the moment, there's one more we're transitioning toward, but in the process of doing this, we've also recognized some subunits in the stratigraphy, which are also key because they deform differently. Some are more favorable to deformation and hosting gold mineralization than others. And then finally, the last piece will be wrapping or defining, what are the actual mineralized zones in this 3D architecture that we have developed. So really, in essence, it boils down to a more just rock in the box, empirically based 3D model of our deposit. And once we have that, we already have the elements of it, but once we have that, I think we've done a very good job in targeting our drilling this past year. I think we're going to be even more effective going into next year. And one of the things, as a final comment on this year's program, that we recognize that I hadn't anticipated a year ago that we would be at this point, but I had thought we would have fleshed out the overall Martiniere gold system completely. And no, there are a lot of gaps, and it remains open to further expansion. So
okay,
that's where we're at.
That's interesting, because I was going to talk to you about, what I wanted to try and understand was the resource footprint expansion process, which you're sort of outlining there. But you talk about a strike length of 2 kilometers, about 800 meters wide, 800 meters deep. Where do you think the kind of cutoff point is, where there's a kind of diminishing returns in the drill density, and I guess ultimately where the cutoff for inclusion in the updated mineral resource model will be?
Yeah, no, good question, and the short answer is there's two parts to the answer. This year we decided, to address this fundamental commercial question: is there a two or more million ounce prize in the mix here? And I'm pretty confident. I'm even more confident about the answer to that than I would have been a year ago. So our strategy this year was to pivot from closer spaced step out holes that incrementally grow an existing resource, to looking at the broader address where we are, the broader area, because there is a lot of gold smoke already noted when I arrived. So we went to the guidelines for my team was no drill holes closer than 150 meters. So that's for a gold system, that's a fairly aggressive approach, but it's kind of a calculated risk approach. So by going to 150 meters, we can cover a lot more ground and expand that footprint. Now, we've done a fair amount of that. We do have some gaps in that 150 meter kind of network that still need to be filled, that we recognize now that we didn't recognize before. But yes, how long would you go? But you can always drill deeper, especially in the Abitibi. But 800 meters is probably a fair enough depth. Maybe a little deeper. If the data takes us that way. But ultimately, once we have a volume of rock fleshed out at that kind of nominal 150 meter resolution. One of the exercises we'll be doing very soon here, before we start drilling next year, is we'll be teaming up with. He's an independent consultant, but he's a resource estimator, a very experienced one, and he is the QP on our current mineral resource estimates that are published. We will be sitting down with Mauro and the exploration team to do kind of call it a back of the envelope look at what have we gotten for our drilling here? How much closer to this 2 million ounce prize are we? And no, it's not a publishable result, but it's kind of a mineral inventory approach, to use an older school term, because when I look at our results right now, as happy as I am with them, it's really going to come down to the individual mineralized zones that we're able to model, which we still need to finish up, and then once we have a better feel for that, I think we'll be in a better position to know. Right now, notionally, looking into next year, we will do a 2-phase program just like we did this year. And when we finish the first phase, we're going to go back and have another look at what we've gotten from our first phase next year to determine, does it make sense to shift and pivot toward closer spaced infill or not? Because I want to get to an answer that we can publish and disclose sooner than later, as much as anybody else. But again, if we can't see a clear path to a resource that really merits further delineation and development, the sooner we can know that answer from an investment perspective, the better.
Understood, and that makes it's a commercial approach to it. The other question I think you need to try and answer, or maybe help us understand, is this kind of potential hybrid mining model in terms of selective underground and bulk stoping, etc. Because you've kind of got these super high grade, 29, 30 grams over 2 meters, 115 grams subintervals, etc. Versus these kind of 1 to 5 gram envelopes that you're seeing. So, how do you go about targeting the type of drilling that you'll want to do to be able to answer that specific question about what type of mining can you quickly move to?
Right. So at this stage, I don't get fixated on mining method. But that said, I've been doing this long enough to know that that's not far in the back of my mind. But what we see at Martiniere, and we'll switch to Fenelon when you're ready, but what we see in the geology of Martiniere in terms of how the gold is distributed through the rock is very similar to what we see at Fenelon at this time at the drilling resolution that we have, and effectively they're discrete shear zones that host the higher grade structures within them. So yeah, if you look at a table of our drill results, that's one of the obvious questions as well. How are you going to deal with a narrow little interval of high grade? You can only be so selective in your mining method. But I think what's really going to make something move above resource into a reserve category that fits into a mine plan will be portions of mineralized shear structures with enough of these discrete higher grade structures in them, so that when you take that larger bulk, you're going to be taking what's in that volume you're going to mine and send off to the mill. But I think it's going to be something like that. So the mining method in our PEA for Fenelon, of course, is long hole underground stoping. In an underground scenario, um, I'll point out that a good portion of Martiniere resource comes right to the top of bedrock within a few tens of meters of surface. So there may be, there is an open pittable component to it. But right now, I don't want to put the cart before the horse. Right now, we need to really flesh out a gold system that we believe, is really going to deliver the size of a prize that we need for the next commercial decision.
Okay, and when we're talking about bug-like mineralization, what are the kind of the vectors that you're using to kind of prioritize the future targets or plunge extensions that you're saying?
First off, it's just knowing where the structures are that we're targeting, and it's not just the fault structures. Portions, the envelopes around them are also sheared. So there's really two styles of deformation in the mix. But when we see, really it's two styles of mineralization, and there's nothing new under the sun on these. One is a style of quartz carbonate veins. We call them crustiform veins. And then especially when we see those overprinted by silicification, silica flooding, that's when we start seeing grades. So we're able to recognize, pretty well in advance, just right in the core shack. When we see those two things, we know, we know we're in a good zone before we even have assays come back.
Okay, so there's this silica flooding, brachiated quartz, carbonate veins,
and
pyrrhotization. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of sulfide, but the sulfide isn't really the main thing. It's the silica flooding and the earlier crustiform veins.
Okay, and is there any changes to that kind of vein morphology the deeper down you go? Does it affect the kind of mining style or grade distribution, do you think?
I don't think we know yet. We're looking at vein paragenesis and vein styles right now. But I think the jury's out on that kind of question.
Right. Okay. And are you going to spend any time on I think you may have mentioned earlier in terms of horsefly potentially emerging as a secondary satellite domain? How much effort do you put into that?
Horsefly, a portion of the horsefly area is captured in the resource right now.
It is. Okay.
A small portion, and that's like right at the top, right at the top of bedrock, and there really wasn't any drilling outboard, lateral, and deeper until this year. Horsefly, where it's situated, is closer to a larger, regional scale fault called the Lactadois Fault, which just runs kind of west-northwest, east-southeast, just north of the Bug Lake Gold System. In fact, Bug Lake Gold System looks like a series of fault splays off that main Lactadois Fault. So as we did our a bit of step out drilling around horsefly, we got some very good results last year, which is what drew us back. We're recognizing now that where that resource pit shell is not the edge of what's likely additional resource. And then even more significantly, and I don't know how significant this will be, it's just too early to tell. But we've got a few holes now that go all the way across the Lactadois Fault as well as within it. And the first one, there's no drilling been done north of that fault historically until this year. Our first hole that went across and out there, and it was a bit of a punt, but my geo wanted to do it, and I trust him. We got 3 meters at around 7 grams, and that was after we crossed over that main fault zone closer, and that's about a half a kilometer away from horsefly, all on its own. We did a little bit of step out drilling and hit more structure. Didn't get any significant grades, but that doesn't really dissuade me. But closer into horsefly itself, some of our holes extending beyond horsefly also go into the Lactadois shear zone, which is actually a broad zone of multiple shears. we've got mineralization in there too. So that really represents a new target that merits, further follow-up until we understand it better. But we've almost got we've got more really prospective targets than we can completely take on at the moment. That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate goal here is to kind of target that kind of 2 million ounce scale indicated. That's the strategic statement that you're going to need to make on this project. So look, we'll come back to Martiniere another time if we talk again. Let's bounce over to Fenelon, as you suggest. That's where the juice is. The PEA kind of suggested a kind of iterative design tied to kind of the rock mechanics and productivity. So to that end, how are the kind of geotechnical domains influencing a kind of things like minimum mining widths and dilution assumptions and stope sequences, et cetera, to kind of see just in terms of that sequencing through to the kind of next stage studies? I mean, can you tell us about the PEA and where you're going from here?
Sure. In parallel with updating the Martiniere resource earlier this year, in 2024. We hadn't it since the previous MRE on Fenelon was done. I think it was issued in early 2023, but really the work goes back to 2022. There was another 25 to 30,000 meters of drilling done on Fenelon that wasn't captured in that subsequent to that resource. So we brought that in, and also when I brought Mauro in last year to help us, update our resource estimates. Mauro and I looked at just how the deposit model was done, and we both agreed that at the drill spacing we have, 50% indicated, 50% inferred. Really, what we can realistically model with confidence are the shear zones. Rather than try to track the individual structures within those shear zones. So that was my reference previously around Martiniere geology and ore controls. So that's the approach we did. We simplified the model down in terms of the number of mineralized domains in the deposit. I think the previous model had north of 100 discrete domains, and Mauro and I, we distilled that down into really 16 specific ones. And why did we do that? Well, one, it fit the data that we have at the moment and the drilling resolution, but also it resulted in a much more, let's say, user-friendly model for our engineers to develop stope shapes around. So it's chunkier volumes, but especially in the core of the deposit, which is drilled down to 40-meter spacing, and that's the indicated portion of the Fenelon resource. We can look at those areas with a pretty, a higher level of confidence, and see that within the volume there is continuity of grade. Again, discrete little individual narrow structures, no, we can't do that drilling from surface at 40 meter spacing. But what we can do is, and what we've done, is fleshed out the mineralized shear volumes that are then, those are the targets of the underground DSO shapes.
Right. Okay. Understood. But what about things, what sort of work, because I think this is important, with regards to domainal metallurgy, right? You've kind of got that kind of gravity recover number, which whatever it was, 65, 66%, and total recovery 96%. Will the kind of network variability help you prioritize stoping, for instance? Or, how do you kind of model that kind of campaign based on processing or continual blending?
Short answer is we're not far enough along to be able to know how to address that question. Okay. I can address it kind of qualitatively based on what I see.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we do have, I think Brian probably mentioned that next year we're going to be doing more
Yeah,
technical
he
stuff,
did.
including bench scale met tests. Uh, I am not fully up to speed on all the met testing that's been done. What I understand is that the met samples that were collected, I believe there were 2 bulk composite samples from drill core collected in the area 51 portion of the deposit. Um, Specifically where in 3D space those came from, I haven't dug down to know. Um, but I believe, and this is typically what we do when you collect your first samples for met testing, you always target the highest grade material to make sure that you get a bulk composite grade that the metallurgist can work with. The plan for next year is to go more for a run of mine type of a bulk composite, an average typical what would normally come up from underground and go to the mill. But to your question around, the gravity recovery, what I can say about Fenelon that's distinctive is coarse visible gold, and coarse just means visible. It could be pinhead size, but it's very common throughout all the rock types, throughout all the ore domains. It's very common to see. So I'm not surprised that the met testing that has been done indicates an initial gravity recovery of 30% of the gold comes right out on that initial gravity first step. That's what the existing bench scale work suggests. My sense is that's probably not going to change very much. I reserve the right to be to be corrected once we have more data. But it does seem that that's going to be the case. For the portion of the deposit that we've developed the PEA mine plan on, that's a qualifier because we've left about 1 million ounces still on the table in resource that are not captured in that plan. So it's a nice additional long tail for future exploration and development.
Okay. That's fine. And I'm so interested in if you haven't got the answers, just that the process and the thinking and the logic kind of gives a lot more sort of insight into the way that you think about these things and obviously how you're executing that part of the equation. Can you talk about the kind of phasing of the pit late in mine life, and what you've kind of what's the rationale for deferring that?
Mainly because right now in the PEA plan, the concept plan as it exists, that is where the underground portal is, the historic open pit. It's currently flooded, but we would need to dewater it. But there's already underground infrastructure in place that if we dewater it, the PEA plan envisions just leveraging that underground infrastructure and building off of it.
Right. And I guess, I think the whole point of the PFS next will be to kind of understand whether kind of early stage selective open pit could improve the IRRs and so forth. So you'll be optimizing like Billy O, I'm sure. Things like, I mean, given where you are, I get these are all sort of knowns in a sense. But can you talk about tailings and process trade-offs at this stage? At what point you kind of get into the weeds there with that?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that we included in the PEA concept plan, and it did add to the capital costs for the project, but dry stack tailings, simply because that is the direction the industry is going. It's much simpler, and we're working in a region that is, essentially almost entirely covered by glacial overburden, much of which is saturated and flat. So if you were to envision a conventional wet tailing storage facility, that implies, engineered structures at least on 3 sides all around, and, covering a much larger footprint and a much longer term asset or result of your mining operation that you're going to have to manage and deal with. So dry stack tailings, smaller footprint, easier to manage. More capital up front or in terms of sustaining capital, but it's the right way to go.
So, yeah, absolutely. So who on the team, or is this again outside consultants required when you're looking at things like underground ramp, geometry, or I guess with the kind of high grade narrow zones, this kind of sequencing and modeling of kind of zone interactions, etc. Who does that, and who manages that from your team?
Yeah, so that is done by external consultants. My background is a geologist, so I know enough to be dangerous in that space, but I also know my limitations. So we are working with a couple of consulting teams. One is Mayhew Consulting, and specifically that's a gentleman named Mike Mayhew, who has a long history. He is an underground miner, developer, engineer. I believe he worked as underground superintendent and later general manager at Kirkland Lake Gold Mines. And then another group out of Montreal, Synectique Consultants, and they have a team of consultants from the various disciplines, including a mining engineer who's also working with us. And so those two groups work very closely together in terms of mine planning. For the PEA, it was a different group, Innovexplo, who have a long history with the project, and they are the engineers who put together the mine plan for the PEA. So they're still the qualified persons for the PEA technical report. But since then we've engaged Mayhew and the Synectique team to essentially map out what a roadmap to a PFS looks like.
Okay, well maybe we could talk to them at some point. Let's go back to geology and exploration then. In which case, it just to kind of finish off the kind of conversation, or move towards the end of the conversation, is where do you, and this is kind of a little bit about infill strategy, which you've talked about, but where do you expect the kind of highest tonnage uplift per dollar of drill beta to help Fenelon kind of move into this kind of PFS feasibility grade confidence? Where's that going to come from?
It's going to flat out more drilling, infill drilling program. And right now, notionally, that looks like about a 50 to 75,000 meter endeavor. So that's a significant program, multiple drills, and we would probably want to fast track that. And what we would be doing essentially is drilling off the inferred portion of the current concept mine plan. So that's what we would do. It's nice to know that we have additional resource outside of that plan, because we all know the rule of thumb when you do infill on anything, especially for the first time, your conversion rate, if you're doing north of 60%, you're doing pretty well. But we don't know. It's a de-risking exercise. So we'll gain some, but we'll lose some ounces out of the inferred category. But we've also got more resource that we can go work with.
Obviously, you've got a couple of big partners involved as well, like Agnico with their kind of participation rights, etc. Are you able to kind of utilize and use some of their knowledge and expertise? I mean, are they involved in conversations with you?
No, they're very available. I think if we were to ask, they would definitely be there to support us. But I don't think we found ourselves in a position of really needing to go tap that resource. But it is really nice to know that they're there if we need them.
Okay. Mark, and 2026, what should we be listening out for? What can we expect from you? What are you excited about?
Well, I think you can already tell I'm very excited to continue fleshing out the Martiniere gold system from a bigger gold systems approach. And in addition to that, we've also got some more work to do on some regional targets, specifically on our Cassau property. To the west of Martiniere, we have an option agreement in place, or an opportunity to earn 50% interest in that by the end of next year. And I think we're well on track to achieve that. And we've got some new earlier stage grassroots targets emerging either on our Grisette claim block, which is east of the Fenelon property, as well as around the Fenelon deposit itself. No surprise, there's only been a little bit of drilling outside of that main deposit area because that had been the main area of focus up until they got that first PEA done. We may also do some targeted infill drilling. We're going to rebuild the Fenelon geologic model or update it following the same methodology we did for Martiniere this year, and firm it up even more. So that will inform that will help inform their optimized infill program down the road. And then finally, we plan as early as we can in the new year to do some more drilling, larger diameter core drilling to collect the material needed for some additional bench scale met testing.
A lot going on.
Yeah.
And now just that pure execution and money. What could go wrong?
Well, as long as we keep our eye on the balls and they all stay in the air, we'll be okay.
Indeed. Mark, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You bet.